Okay, and welcome into another edition of Talks with Agassi, and joined with Professor Joseph Agassi. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I wanted to talk to you today about schizophrenia, a topic that we talk about often. And I wanted to start off by reading, a definition I saw online from the American Psychiatric Association, the ones who more or less get to define what mental health is, at least in America. So their definition is: schizophrenia is a chronic brain disorder that affects less than 1% of the US population. And when it is active, symptoms can include delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, and trouble with thinking and lack of motivation.
This is one of the stupidest ideas that go around as the paradigm of science.
Yeah.
There is no evidence that schizophrenia has anything to do with the brain anatomy. The brain of the schizophrenic is the same as the brain of any other person. It is a mental disease, and the mechanists insist on finding mechanical or physical evidence for every mental difference, which may indeed be true, but which is stated dogmatically as a known fact rather than as a metaphysics.
Why do you think they have this bias?
Because they identify mechanism with science, and they are slaves to science.
Sometimes I wonder if science is their slave.
I don't know, but the idea of science with capital S is very popular and is very vulgar.
Yeah, there is. It reminds, right, of the ancient joke about the town of Chelem, that they lose the town key, and they look for it under the light.
That's right.
But that's not where they lost the key. But that's where the
that's a very famous joke. Yes, of looking for the lost penny under the light. Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting, a very tragic state of science where these mechanisms, like we have MRI machines and other fancy ways of looking inside the brain, and people want to have the location and want to be able to. They think that because they have this magic microscope into the brain that they can explain everything with it.
What they did find, which is a great discovery, is electric charges and currents in the brain.
Yeah.
But they don't identify anything with anything, except that they found the Broca areas, which is, of course, mid-19th century discovery already.
Yeah, there has been the electricity in the brain. By the way, recently there was maybe 1 or 2 years ago, there was a new discovery, because they used to think that there's only one type of electric activity in the brain, the action potential, that the entire neuron is involved. But they discovered that there's actually some electrical activity that only parts of the neuron make on their own.
Okay. Very interesting. I'm not familiar with these things.
But we digress. I'm sorry. But I digress. Yeah, so how would you conceptualize schizophrenia?
First of all, schizophrenia is a form of paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
Paranoia vera is very uncommon. Kaplan found very few cases of it, but Fried and I consider schizophrenia a degraded version of paranoia. Usually, people with paranoia don't go to physicians unless they are in trouble and the families take them there and so on. And by that time they are schizophrenic. But before that, it's paranoia.
Yeah, and you're referencing a book you wrote with Fried, Paranoia,
Called Paranoia,
where you talk about the paradox of schizophrenia and paranoia and how
the paradoxes of paranoia, yes.
The paradox being that the madman is more sane than anyone else sometimes.
He's more logical, not more sane. He is insane, but he is logical. Insanity is not lack of logic. That is the point. There is no question that Quixote is as logical as others, if not more.
So what is the problem if the logic is fine? The conclusion?
The problem is elsewhere. The problem, we claim, it's our hypothesis, that what makes one paranoid is shown by the famous difference between the crazy professor and the crazy professor.
Okay.
And this is a famous joke, and I think this covers the whole field. The crazy professor says, I have solved all the problems in my field of inquiry, and my peers will not admit it because they don't want me to be the chair of the department. And the crazy professor says, I'm crazy, ask my peers.
Right.
And we claim that what makes a deviant paranoiac is his refusal to recognize himself as a deviant. That is to say, if you are as crazy as they come and you acknowledge it, you are sane. That's the paradox of paranoia.
Mm. And that's something I wanted to get into later, but we're here now. That's kind of your solution for, quote, insanity, is recognizing the insanity.
Oh, no, we go further. We say, first of all, the insane suffer. We start with a given patient, and contrary to most of our peers, we say, if you have no patient, you have no problem. So we start with a patient, someone who suffers. And the question is, what do the mentally sick suffer from? They suffer not from mental sickness, but from something else, from loneliness, from confusion, but they are in pain.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if there is no person in pain, then there's no problem. And one thing is to diagnose paranoia, to say what paranoia is, and another to say what is the pain of the paranoia. Persons who are paranoiac and happy about it, ambulatory paranoiacs, are not patients. They are paranoiacs, but not patients. The interesting fact is that paranoiacs are drawn into fanatic sects, because the fanatics have a lot in common with the paranoiac, except that the sect are familiar with there being sects and the paranoiac is not.
The sects are familiar with being sects?
Yeah, that's right. This is to say, if you go to any sect, they don't like to be called sect, but they say we are special, we know the truth. For example, many sects are linked with ancient Egypt, you know. They have direct contact with ancient Egypt and they know the secrets of the pyramids. This is a beginning with, by the way, Freemasons. And you know, on the dollar, you have the pyramid with an eye.
Yes.
That's
American.
That's American Freemasons, yes. They are on the dollar.
Yes, it's one of their greatest works of advertising. It's very impressive.
And there is no question that what makes the Freemasons what they are is that it's a social network.
And yet this idea might be called paranoid.
It's not, because they are familiar with it and make point of it. It's a secret society, but every one of them knows I am a Freemason. Yeah. Since the Freemasons were anti-Semitic, then there is a Jewish Freemasons, you know that.
I knew there was in Israel some Freemasons. I didn't
It's
know.
in America, and it came to Israel. It's called Bnei Brit.
Oh, I've heard about them. Okay.
So now you know.
So,
Bnei Brit is the Jewish Freemasons that exist because the Freemasons are anti-Semitic.
okay. Did they influence any currency? Did they get any of their icons anywhere?
Not that I know of, no. But they have their own network, which is influential, of course, like the Freemasons.
And this is kind of a thing, going back to Paranoia, an interesting thing about reality is that a lot of people are doing a lot of fuckery with reality. And paranoids who are supposedly insane tend to pick up on it a lot. And these days in this COVID world, right, there's everyone is disputing everybody else's version of reality.
You see, all the conspiracy theorists have their own versions of reality, yes. That's why they have the conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
The conspiracy theory, according to Fried and me, is derivative.
How so?
First of all, I know everything and you are stupid.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Now the question is, and so on. From here you go to.
You know, I always felt that each conspiracy theory I hear is stupid, but the idea of people secretly meeting and orchestrating control over other humans, that's a very sound idea. That looks.
First of all, conspiracies abound. Secondly, most conspiracies are worthless. They end up with nothing. But people conspire, and what the conspiracy theory says is that all evils that we suffer are due to conspiracies. There is corona because of a conspiracy. So the conspiracy theory is one thing. There are conspiracies and people conspire and so on. But the conspiracy theory is explaining the COVID by, there was a laboratory somewhere in China. Now, whether there was or not doesn't matter. I'm not telling you that there is or isn't, or that I care whether there is or isn't. But those people who know that they, and so on, I don't want to go on playing it, but that's the conspiracy.
Yeah, I have to.
I mean, the conspiracy is, not the conspiracy is.
Yes, you're saying emotionality, that you're saying the conspiracy theorist is ruled by such fiery emotionality.
By fiery involvement.
Mm.
You can't stay aside and not care for the fact that millions of people are, and so on.
Right, right.
And
but
you see, there are conspiracies which fit the doctrine tremendously. For example, all arms underhanded deals, all narcotics, illegal narcotics. They all fit the conspiracy theory very well. And narcotics is a major thing. For example, Afghanistan lives on narcotics. There's no question about it.
mm-hmm.
So narcotics is a part of our life. But the narcotic that, and so on.
Yeah.
That's the conspiracy.
I have to say, I want to share a story with you that was crazy to me. Many years ago, I was working in a psychiatric ward where we were interviewing people who came in handcuffs. They would be brought in by policemen against their will. And there was a young woman brought in, and she seemed very intelligent.
They are all intelligent, by the way.
She seemed very frightening. She seemed very strong physically and very poised. And when I walked in the door, she said, "Have you been briefed about the situation?" And I said, "I was told that a policeman picked you up because you were a danger to someone." And she said, "No." Oh, she said, "Oh, so you're one of them."
Yes.
And then she said, let me explain to you what's going on. And she said, I was raped as a child. And for the rest of my life, I have been put into mental institutions by a powerful cabal of child rapists.
Which may be true or not, you don't know.
That's the point. So this story happened many years ago, but I kind of think that it is true. I'm sorry, your camera went off, but I think this.
Wow.
But the sound is, yeah.
Okay.
And now this happened years ago, but then in the recent years there was a story about what's his name? Oh, Jeff. Wow, I can't believe I'm Jeffrey Epstein. Have you heard?
Yes.
Jeff?
Oh, yes, I had. I'm not interested in it, but it was a major scandal, yes.
Well, it's worth just to say that he had a cabal of super rich child molesters.
Oh, yes.
So it's
this is a conspiracy which we got corroboration about, yes.
Yeah, and it was crazy to me to have like in my mind when I first met her, she was insane, but then reality changed such that, you know, it became far less insane.
My point about sanity is whether the conspiracies described occur or not is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I certainly would not declare that everything that insane people say is false.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to child molestation, particularly within the family.
Right.
When a man rapes his daughter, his underage daughter, this is ground for conspiracy, of course. What do you expect him to go to the police?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And these things, unfortunately, are much more common than we are willing to agree. Child molestation within the family.
Yes, yes. I once talked to a police officer about it for 15 minutes and then
of course,
a very hard time.
It's not only that. I had a brother who was crazy. And he, from time to time, got sane and got out of the mental home. And then my father came to support him and saw to it that he was sent back to mental home. But my father would say that what I say is completely off and just malicious and so on. He had only good intention, but he was the cause of my brother's insanity. He was a violent father, and he was the cause of my brother's insanity, and he wouldn't admit it. So he was always bona fide.
He brought in oppressive mental notions that made your brother.
Yeah, with all the goodwill, I must stress. I'm not complaining about my father. He was violent, and I don't sanction violence, but certainly he was friendlier to my brother than to me.
Yeah. The things that we talked about, they remind me, once I asked you, what is the difference between a schizoid and a schizophrenic? And your answer to me was that a schizoid is an individual that society has failed to turn into a schizophrenic.
No, first of all, let's take it slowly. Schizophrenia has, of course, social causes, pressure, but it has also a personality cause, that is to say, I will never be crazy, and if we put pressure on you, you will be crazy. That's a great difference. So I'm not a schizoid and you are, because I will never be crazy and you will, if put pressure on. Now, the question is, how do we decide who is a schizoid? And there is a study of it, as long as Science magazine has it, 100,000 words, which showed that being schizoid is inherent, is inborn. And the proof is by questionnaires. And the questionnaires determine how schizoid you are. And one of the questions is, do you have a schizophrenic family member? So I wrote a letter to the Science magazine and I said, the questionnaires are unnecessary. I know the result a priori. And they didn't publish my letter.
Yeah. So schizoid.
You see, there are subtler things. See, it's not nice to call you schizophrenic, but there is in philosophy objectivism and subjectivism. By the way, I never use these words. They are for me the worst possible. But the question is, what does it mean? Objectivist and objectivist. And I'll tell you, I'm objective and you are subjective. That's very nice, isn't it? That, by the way, Hegel invented these words.
Hegel invented the idea. So anybody.
Oh, yes.
It's strange.
And the main point is for you to realize that I'm objective and you're subjective. That's so nice.
It is strange that anybody would ever believe that an opinion they have is objective. Because as you say, it's impossible.
Of course it's objective because I know the truth. It's you who pervert the truth.
Yeah.
And unless you own it, and until you own it, you are no good. The only way for you to rehabilitate yourself is to agree that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah, and that's the most violent thing in mental health, right?
And in philosophy. And people who say that philosophy and craziness have something in common has a lot to do. You see, I don't like Wittgenstein, but one thing of Wittgenstein I like very much. Two people watch two people discussing reality. And one of the watchers say to the other, they are not crazy, they are philosophizing. I thought this is such a beautiful story. Of course, Wittgenstein said that anyone who philosophizes is crazy.
Well, to try and understand the reality around us, it would make you go insane. Feels like it. There's no clear explanation to.
There is no doubt that research can create enormous intellectual strain, which at the moment you just see the light and you know you're right. And this is known as, what is it, a paranoid episode. Now, the interesting thing is, Fried and I say, that most people think that paranoid episode leads to paranoia. So many paranoid episodes are not recorded because they don't lead to paranoia. And many paranoid episodes are not recorded because you don't want to blame your colleague for craziness. But there is no question in my mind that this exists. I remember I drove often on the major east to west highways in the United States. And I made it a rule always to go to coffee houses every 2 or 3 hours because you can fall asleep on the wheel and then die.
Yeah.
And I remember, like now, I once entered the ladies' room without noticing. And it was odd to me because unlike the gents' room, the ladies' room has an enormous mirror. And I was dazed, and a lady of whom I know nothing except that I owe her, turned me around and sent me to the door. And I, of course, am in her debt because I had a student who had a similar event and was sent to a mental home.
So she
this is paranoiac episode.
Yeah, what would it be called? Maybe disordered thinking a little bit.
A moment, no, the point. There are many people with disordered thinking, especially great political leaders, but I'm speaking of breakdowns, that is to say, a moment of insanity, which we all have, but we obliterate because we are terrified of them.
Yeah, that's the message, that it's not okay, not tolerable.
Yes, I don't know if you know, the theory now is that most of our memory is reconstruction, not memory.
Oh yes, for sure. We have a lot of fun experiments in psychology to show that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remembered a movie once with the wrong heroine, and I remembered all sorts of episodes, but always with the wrong heroine. And when I saw it again and saw it was wrong, it gave me a shock.
For years, I thought that the researcher, psychology researcher Kahneman,
Yes.
had the political opinions of Meir Kahana, who was a genocidal politician, and simply because the name the name reminded me, I thought I'm not going to read any of his research because he's in favor of genocide. But then
But let me tell you about Kahneman. By the way, it's Kahneman and Tversky. Tversky was the salesperson who managed. Yeah, but he died young. The Kahneman story is very interesting. Let me give you the background. The probability of one event is always not smaller or bigger than the probability of two events.
Okay.
The probability of heads is quarter, of two heads is half and quarter. So more events reduce the probability.
Right, of course.
But one event given another event raises the probability.
Okay.
Now, Kahneman and Tversky told stories, say, about a physician and his co-worker, female co-worker. And they asked how plausible it is and so on. And then they added information that his close co-worker was MD. And this changed the probability. But the question is, did it change the probability up or down? Depending on whether you say he was a doctor because she was a doctor, or he was a doctor and she was a doctor. The one makes the probability higher, the other makes the probability lower.
I don't follow.
I tell you a story about a doctor, and I ask you how plausible it is. And in the story, he has a co-worker, a female co-worker. And then I add to the story that the female co-worker is also a doctor. And I ask whether the story becomes more plausible or less.
Okay.
And whatever your choice is, you are wrong because I had in mind the opposite.
Okay. So you're critiquing their story, the method as being something completely.
They told a story which was meant to deceive the people whom they asked.
Yeah.
And then they showed that the people whom they asked were irrational. They wanted to prove that people are irrational, as if it demands a proof, but that's another story. And they proved it in a most incredible manner.
Yeah.
You see, if I say a fellow was a doctor and he had a colleague, a female colleague, and I tell you a story, and then I add that the female colleague was also a doctor, then the story may go up or it may go down. The question is how to understand the
story
colleague being a female doctor. Is it an additional information or a condition for the story? And these give the opposite results. Given a condition, you say if the fellow's colleague is a doctor, probably he is also a doctor. But the question is, given that he's doctor, does his colleague have to be a doctor? No. So you see, if I tell you a story and then add that his peer was a doctor, then you can read it any way you like. And where you like is wrong because I intended the opposite.
Right.
Reading.
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, something that around 1900 was very famous as the paradoxes of probability. They were telling stories about gambling.
Yeah, there's this
Stories by, sorry,
the Monte Carlo fallacy.
no, that's just one of them and a well-known one, and it's not a serious one. But they always told the story not complete and asked people to judge. And then they showed that you could judge it differently in different situations. And this was known as the paradoxes of probability, and it engaged many very intelligent people like Poincaré who tried to solve it and so on.
But so what are you saying, that it wasn't a real paradox, that it's a...
It wasn't a paradox at all. It was a mistake. If you tell an incomplete...
What was a mistake? To ask people
The mistake is telling an incomplete story as if it is complete.
Right.
Or very often when I ask a question, the question implies a mistake which is extremely common. And it is that every well-worded question has an answer.
I hate that. I hate that. And I hate what I hate most in question and answers in dialogue with people is how people get to put in their assumptions in each question, and even the question why. That's behind the question why is the idea that because I asked it, now you must tell me the reason.
One of the greatest mistakes in Israel, by the way, is that people take it for granted that in conversation, when somebody asks you a question, you have to answer.
Which is funny, because what the Jews brought to the world is answering a question with a question, but the Israelis...
For example, yes. And if the question is, why do you answer a question with a question? Then the answer is, why not?
What else would I do?
Yes.
Yes, it's a fun game. The last thing that we touched about, the last thing that I want, because in these, I do these podcasts with you because I love to share your wisdom. And I want to talk about going insane. And we don't have to talk about it very much length, but just the personal subjective experience of going insane. And what does one do when you realize that you're being insane?
I don't care no more.
You don't care about being insane?
No, I'm being pressured. And the pressure becomes intolerable. And then at one moment I say, I don't care. For example, suppose my father shouts at me. And it is, I try very hard to please him for obvious reasons, by the way, for very normal reasons. And he ups the stakes, which is common for many kinds of ambitious parents. The famous story about the kid coming home with a grade sheet 99.
With a grade that's 99 and the father's not happy.
Exactly so. I think this is one of the nastiest stories I know.
Yeah.
I once spoke in Tel Aviv University to young people, teenagers, who were excellent students. There was an experiment in Tel Aviv University of bringing high school kids to the university to take part in courses and so on. And I talked to them and I expressed familiarity with the pressure put on them. And one parent complained about me to the officials, saying that I recommended suicide.
Knowing you probably did to some degree. Not a real suicide of the body, but a suicide of the mind.
Oh, yes, this I do regularly to everybody, even not too much pressure. It's wonderful to be schizophrenic. People don't realize that the sickness of the schizophrenia is not the split personality, but the loss of control. And the loss of control, by the way, comes from suffering, not from the schizophrenia.
Yeah, and then the suffering itself is a loss of control, right? Because you lose control over controlling your suffering.
Sometimes the suffering is from lack of control. When Papa puts pressure on you in sufficiently early age, it's not loss of control, it's no control.
Mhm.
Freud talked about it. He said, you are damned if you do and you are damned if you don't. And by the way, what amazed me most is that first Freud, who was so sensitive, who realized that, sided with the father.
Yeah.
That shocked me. By the way, it's a very famous paper of his, The Id and the Ego.
Yeah, Freud is shocking in how profoundly perceptive it was, and yet how authoritarian and patriarchal he was.
Exactly so, yeah. And by the way, the interesting fact about him is that he had many children and he left his wife at home when he went on vacation. And he went on vacation with his sister-in-law.
Mhm.
And he didn't realize that it was sex, although he said that sex is ubiquitous. This is his major contribution, that he saw sex everywhere where there is and where there isn't, everywhere sex. And he saw no sex in his travels with his sister-in-law to Firenze.
I think he also saw no sex in his compulsive cigar smoking, which always interested me.
Oh no, on this, he said, sometimes a cigar is only a cigar. So on this, he was aware, yes.
So he acknowledged that sometimes it's not.
That's right. He did realize that cigar is a phallic symbol.
Yeah. Okay, I think we will finish on this. I will talk to you 1 second, but I will thank you very much for joining and sharing.
You're most welcome. We are done.
We are done.